Hi, everybody. This is Desi Vijay, a North-South National Team member and a coordinator for webinars. Glad to see you all here today. Hope you're all doing great. Today, we are switching gears from our usual MTP webinars and revisiting one of the important topics that's really very dear and near to us. Uh, this is the third session of that series. We really are pleased to have a panelist of immigrant parents who grew up in India and raised their children here in this country, and even some of them are also seeing their children raising their own kids and perhaps seeing the contrast. We also have professionals here who would share their professional experiences and give us some guidance too. They are all here today to share their views, experiences with us. I'm really glad that we are able to make this happen today, and welcome to yet another exciting webinar. Topic today, of course, is bridging the generation gap with the immigration generation speaking. And we have very accomplished persons amongst us to uh, talk to us and then give us some guidance and all those things. Let's start with the program. Let me introduce the moderator of the session, who in turn will introduce the panel for you. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome Shivam Gandhi as a moderator of today's session. Shivam is no stranger to all of us. He was there in our last session and then really set the tone for the whole session to proceed. And we were all so much, indebted to him for his contributions. But Shivam also continued to collaborate with us, and then he uh, set the topics, and then took part in all our discussions and took a lot of initiatives. So we are really pleased to have him here. Shivam is also a computational biologist. He's working at Mass General Hospital, working on studying on Crohn's disease. He graduated from computer science and mathematics from Brown University. And outside of the work, he leads a team of young men with a personal development group, the men centered around building their healthy relationship and authentic communication. So with that, I welcome Shivam to the this thing, and then please introduce the panel to the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be the moderator. This topic is near and dear to my heart. It's kind of woven into my identity, and I feel like there's a lot of healing that can be done by confronting these issues head on. So we have three parents who are panelists and then three psychologists. So I'm going to introduce each of the parents one by one. We have Dr. Geeta Shah. Geeta started her training in pediatric medicine in Mumbai as an intern and had an opportunity to go to the UK. So then she migrated to the US in the 70s after she married her husband. She's now retired after 45 years of practice, and she retired right before the pandemic. Our next parent is Sai Rachakonda. He's a North-South volunteer for the past more than a dozen years. He's currently chapter director for Houston and is a liaison with North-South Foundation activities. As an immigrant parent, he went through some of the emotional roller coasters like any other immigrant parent, learned about himself and about bringing up a child on the journey through several years of experiencing firsthand. Then we have Savita Nairu. Savita has been a volunteer at North-South for about 18 years. Her association with the organization started when her son participated in North-South Spelling Bee as a kindergartner in 2003. She is a certified domestic violence advocate, and she has a bachelor's from Bangalore University and a master's in computer science from Tufts University. Then we have the professionals. Our first is Dr. Vijay Sustarda. He's a practicing clinical psychologist with office locations in Naperville and Chicago, and has been in practice since 1995 under the practice name Self-Improvement Through Awareness PC. He has done over 150 community mental health presentations in the US and India, and is also conducting research on various topics specific to the Indian diaspora. Next, we have Dr. Briya. She's a psychiatrist working in New York City for an NGO serving the homeless and underserved population. She also enjoys working with people from diverse populations in various backgrounds and is a first-generation Indian American, having grown up in this country. And finally, we have Kali Tanikela. She's a California licensed therapist and adjunct faculty at University of San Francisco. She's currently pursuing her PhD in Hindu theology at GTU in Berkeley, interested in historical coherence, colonial intergenerational trauma, and decolonial indigenous solutions to modern problems. All right, so these are our panelists. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to ask the parents a question, and then the psychologists are going to reflect on what the parents talk about. You know, since they're psychologists, they have lots of clinical experience and can share from that. And we're hoping that this is going to be really enlightening, and hopefully this will also give the audience a chance to perhaps reflect on these questions themselves. And then at the end, we're going to have some time for the audience to ask questions. So our first question is, it's like, we can't talk about parenting unless you talk about your own experience as a child, because we often replicate what we experienced as a kid as adults. There's a term called intergenerational trauma, and I guess this is very salient in terms of reflecting on your own childhood and seeing how that plays out. So our first question is, how was your childhood? Geeta, would you like to go first?
Yes, Namaste. I am very, very thankful for having the privilege to talk to the audience, because this is a subject. I've worked with children all my life, but my personal childhood was somewhat non-traditional, and I grew up in Mumbai basically, and had my education from middle school onwards in Mumbai. Prior to that, I was for several years in a very small town in South Africa, where my father's family had settled, and they were all businessmen, and everybody just joined the business in the family. But my father was somewhat of a rebel, and he actually decided to settle in Mumbai and studied economics and law. And so I came from South Africa around just as I was starting middle school. Prior to that, I had elementary school education there in a very small single school in that town, and my father who homeschooled me. And so that was the first decade of my life. In the second decade, I was in India, did my pediatrics, and I was starting my pediatric education. And actually, I got a opportunity to go for a 1-month externship to UK. But I also want to tell the audience that my mother's side of the family, I visited, they also lived in Mumbai, and I visited them very frequently, and I have very, very happy memories of going to that house. That was a very traditional Indian household where the grandfather called the shots, and it was extremely gender-based. Women did exactly, and they were all very happy, very harmonious. I'm really now thinking back, wondering how well they all lived together, following the hierarchy and respect to the elders, etc. And my mother had studied till 4th grade, which was considered adequate for her purpose. And so they were very traditional. My parents married by arranged marriage, with the families knowing each other. And so that side of the intergenerational dynamics was very positive in my mind. And so that was interesting. But my father was kind of a very Gandhian, believed very strongly in women's emancipation and against racial biases when Hindu-Muslim things were going on. And so he was of a very different mental makeup. And when I got a chance to go to UK, of course, the family, the relatives, everybody was kind of skeptical, because in those days, women in their 20s didn't usually go by themselves abroad. They usually got married and went. And my father was okay with it, because education was his prime motive. And he sort of said that his parting words on going to UK was that we will back you up, but you know right from wrong. And that was it. And so I went to England for 2 years, and then I went to Canada, all work really, as I got my residency admissions And then I was in Alberta in Canada for a year. During that period, I happened to meet my husband through a cousin, and so that's how I came up. I was never intending to come to US, but I came up because of that. And my work visa then had to be transferred to immigration, green card as they called it, immigration visa. And so my parents knew about it. They met my husband's family in Mumbai, who were also from there, and they were fine with it. And we actually got married in a courthouse here in America. And because we didn't have money to go back to India and kind of have a proper wedding or anything like that. And then I started my practice here. So my memories of my childhood is, on one hand, I saw and I spent a lot of time with my traditional maternal family, but on the other hand, I saw my father just believing extremely strongly. He was very active in Satyagraha movement and all that. So it was a very mixed kind of exposure. And I think I've come out now, thinking back, very positively, because my father and I would talk about things very openly, but general things, not So I was not shy of expressing my opinion to my father. So that was my kind of experience.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You touched on a lot regarding, I guess, things that would seem relatively liberal within India from your time. I know growing up, I would go to India, and one thing you talked about was racial and gender equality, and that was something that, with my extended family, was kind of hard to see, especially on my father's side, and it could get quite difficult just hearing some of their opinions. So it seems like you really benefited from that kind of liberal environment.
Yes, but I also saw the very traditional one as well, and that was the dynamics were very good and positive. So people were very traditional, obviously, still at that point.
Thank you. Yeah, Kali, do you want to talk about your childhood?
Sure, thanks, Shivam. Namaste, everyone. I grew up in India, actually. So the first 7 years of my life were in Madhya Pradesh, in Jabalpur, which is a very small town. And then I moved to Mumbai for the next 7 years. So I was there till I was 15. And then I moved to the US. I was on the East Coast for a year, then moved to California. And then I've literally never left. So I graduated from high school here, college here, went to master's, getting my PhD here. I got married back. So the big piece of my childhood that I really relate with is I belong to a spiritual lineage. I have a guru. So I have a very strong spiritual ground. It's very interesting because women, my guru is a woman. And she, doesn't like, we don't have there's no real adherence to the caste system or any of the traditional kind of bounds on women. So, I grew up reading the Vedas, and I know the Sanskrit, the Rudram and Mantra Pushpam and the Shodashopachara Puja, like all of that stuff. It was very traditional in terms of the adherence to the textual basis of Hinduism. But at the same time, we didn't really have any kind of discrimination within the family. When my grandparents, my uncle was like a doctor who traveled all over the world. He married a Jamaican nurse, and so we had a very mixed family, and it was never talked about or anything. It was just very normal for me, so I just had a kind of, and then I grew up in Mumbai, so I was surrounded by people. I went to a Catholic school. I had friends I didn't even know what traditions they belonged to or what their backgrounds were. It was the mixed socioeconomic class friend group. So, it was just sort of I come from a very traditional Hindu grounding of there's divinity everywhere. There's divinity in me, and there's divinity in every person that I come across and everything. The transition to the US was difficult for me, and which got me interested in mental health. Becoming interested in the differences in the two culture, and I practice that a lot too. talked to a lot of Indian parents, and some of the things that come up for them as they're raising kids here, which is why I'm here. Like, I'm super passionate about this topic. And, I'm especially interested in, we'll probably get to that, but this is more about my history and background, so I want to stick to the question, but that's where I come from. So I have a very strong grounding in the lived experience of a Hindu Sanatani background. And then I've grown up here, I was trained here. So I completely, I'm also off here. So I would identify myself as an immigrant, but like a generation 1.5, because I've definitely kind of I've straddled both parts of my identity and had to reconcile both of those things. So I kind of have a mixed experience. That's me.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I get the generation 1.5 part. Maybe if you're 1.5, I'm generation 1.75 in a way. I was born here, but straddling that Indian and American identity is very difficult for me. And more I'm realizing how much being Indian feels more core to who I am than being American, especially going back to India a lot. It really kind of changes your worldview. So it's definitely a big part of a child's experience. So thanks for sharing that. Savita, would you like to go next? How your childhood was?
Sure. Thanks, Shivam. It's really interesting to just hear the upbringing of just a couple of people that we've heard and how different it is. I come from Bangalore in India. I had what I considered a typical childhood. It was happy. We had a large extended family. We were always in and out with cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents, and summers were a lot of fun. We never really felt isolated. We always felt like we were surrounded by a good support system. The focus was heavy on education. I think in those days you would get a red mark if you didn't do well or whatever. You had an underline under the score, under your marks to say that you did not pass a particular test or something. And I know several of my friends who kind of got beaten up, which was kind of an accepted version of raising your kids that time. I was interested in a lot of extracurricular activities. I did yoga. I loved sports, like handball, basketball. I did dance and music. But for all these extracurricular activities, I signed up on my own. My parents were not involved, even at a very young age. And I had to walk. Wherever I signed up, whatever I committed to, I had to do it myself. There was nobody to drive me. I think that's something that's very different that we see over here. Obviously, in our era, there was no technology and devices like this. We had just one phone that everybody used at a certain time. I think I was 16 by the time we got a TV. So we had a lot of time where we spent with our friends playing outside. Of course, we had a curfew where we'd come back by sundown. Our summers were not filled with internships or jobs or anything. It was carefree. We were able to go play outside. Respecting elders was a huge thing. I think it kind of overtook everything else. Looking back, I feel like in that generation, parents were concerned more about themselves and their things more than kids' feelings. I think that's where the generation gap kind of came about. But, it was not something that I realized. It's only looking back at it now. My dad came from the army, so we were held to certain strict rules. Physical exercise was important, being healthy, eating healthy, those sort of things. But I'm the youngest of 3 kids. I have 2 older brothers. As a daughter and a girl, I was held to different standards. So I couldn't get a vehicle to drive. I couldn't, as a teenager, I couldn't have boys as friends, not boyfriends, but just as friends. Very heavily frowned upon. And some of the other restrictions I found was very difficult for me was when I was pursuing my goals, playing at the state level for sports, I was not allowed to travel outside the state. My brothers were free to go wherever they wanted, but I could not. But I spent a lot of time with my dad, and he's very hands-on, so he taught me how to use tools. We worked on his motorbike and his car a lot, so that made me a very handy and independent person. When I came here as an adult, it helped me a lot. Let's see, what else? So as a career, if I wanted, well, I wanted to do IFS, Indian Foreign Service, because I wanted to travel and I wanted to get into that management level. But my mom put her foot down and said, the only way you will be going abroad is after you get married. But my brothers, again, they were free to take their jobs wherever they wanted. And so that I found, I accepted it because I didn't know any different. I know it hurt me. Like I was losing a few opportunities, but that was basically, what it was. But overall, I had a really good childhood. I had two parents who loved us, even though they did not, they did not voice the whole "I love you," "I'll give you a hug," "come here." That part of like physical exhibition of affection did not exist, but it was understood that we were protected and loved. So that's my childhood.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I just wanted to interject very quickly that I'm probably one of the oldest here, and my generation is probably pretty much the first wave of immigrants from the 1950s to 1970s. So we really, our children are all Shivam says 30s and 40s. Many of them are married, and we have grandchildren. So I came from, and this was totally pre-technology, pre-everything era that we came. So we had a very different experience than what maybe Kali had or has had. And I would share that because we had no support system, and that was very different for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I guess the different ages, I guess culture progresses over time. So the older immigrants' experience is going to be different than younger immigrants' experience. Savita, you brought up an interesting point about the validation of children's feelings and how that wasn't really a thing. And I can relate to that. I think for myself, at least this past week, I've been dealing with a lot of anger for feeling like my own emotions were never validated. And in my journal, I would write every night, like, nobody's ever going to listen to me. Nobody's ever going to listen to me. That's how I grew up. And it seems like it's very common in Indian families. And then you also touched on the point of having different expectations based on gender growing up. And it seems like that's a repeated theme. So yeah, these are two very important points. So thank you for sharing.
If I could really quickly jump in as well, Savita ji, your sharing sparked something for me as well. We had a lot of extracurriculars that we did growing up. It was just my sister and I. I'm the older one. My sister is 1.5 years apart from me. And I had the complete opposite experience of what Savita ji had. And so like we traveled out of state. So we were in music, dance. I learned Carnatic music and like had like national scholarship kind of thing. And then I went to Bharatanatyam, and then we did karate. And karate, like once you get to like black belt, you have to travel out of state for the competition. So we used to go to like national competitions, and they were all over the country. We went to Delhi for one. I was in Mumbai, which is, that's like an overnight train ride to go there. And then, we didn't have a phone at the time. So it was just like we'd find some like STD, IST phone and like call my parents and be like, hey, we want something. And just like, and then so we used to travel there. We went to like Rishikesh, we went to Madhya Pradesh, we went to like all over the country, and so I had I don't know if it's an age thing or a generational thing, but that was definitely like my experience and my sister's experience. Honestly, we didn't know we were girls. Like we didn't know that we couldn't say certain things or couldn't be certain things. If you look at the choices we made, I'm a psychologist. My sister's a bioengineer. And we just picked our own stuff. So it was so we had a very I felt like it would be remiss if I didn't share that. Like just the variety of experience that exists here, even amongst the panelists, right? Because there's so many different ways that our culture manifests itself. So I didn't get a chance to like speak about that. And so Savita, as you were talking, I was like, oh, I should share that. So that's okay.
But one of the things I have, and I could be wrong, but in my observation, I have found that North Indian families are a little more liberal than the South Indian families, where it's a lot more traditional.
I'm from Andhra, so I'm Telugu. So
Okay.
yeah, so I'm actually South Indian. So I'm not trying to be contrarian, Savita ji. I hope you forgive me. But it's just so my ashram is in the south. I go there all the time. I was born there, married there. So I come from a southern family. Again, I think it's just a matter of like family culture, right? So it's just yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting to hear the cultural differences in that sense. Priya, do you want to talk about what your childhood was like?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Priya. I am a first-generation American. So I was actually born in India, but I came to the US when I was under a year old. My parents were both in grad school when I was growing up, so they were very stressed out, very busy. They were also in a completely new country, new culture. Growing up for me, I felt like I really was never wanting for anything. I had everything I wanted, but some of the things that other people have said do resonate with me. I think that there wasn't a lot of validation of emotions or physical affection, but I knew my parents loved me and would do everything for me growing up. Personally, I felt like I had to also straddle between two different cultures. I had my Indian friends that were through our Indian community. I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. We had strong connections with an Indian community there. We went to temple, so I had friends there. But then my school that I went to was predominantly white, really no immigrants there. And I was also in some extracurriculars like Girl Scouts and other things like that, where the friend groups that I had there were predominantly white. And I felt like growing up, I was often kind of switching back and forth between the two cultures and almost like a chameleon, the way I would behave with one culture and another. And I think it took me a while to really figure out who I was and what I wanted. Growing up, my parents, I think, were very supportive for what I wanted to do, but of course had their preferences of maybe what would provide me a more secure life, a better future. So something like, medicine, engineering, that kind of thing. I decided to go to medical school. It wasn't just because of my parents. It was also something that I wanted to do, but I think I would be lying if I didn't say that that was something that was also a bit encouraged and pushed by my parents. I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother. He's about 7.5 years younger than me. And I will say I did not feel too much of the gender gap or gender discrepancy. I don't know if it's because he was so much younger than I was growing up, but I never felt like there were things that I could not do that my brother could do. I did feel that they were a bit more lenient with him, but I think that was a combination of him being so much younger than me, maybe him being a boy, sure, but also my parents had been living in this country a little bit longer, were in a different stage of their lives. So I think that also probably played a role in how he was raised versus me. And so now I'm a practicing psychiatrist in New York City. So as Shivam said, I work for an NGO, but I also have a private practice on the side. And in my private practice, I see a lot of first generation Indians or South Asians who are struggling with a lot of the things that I struggled with growing up. And they come from families of various sort of you know, how strict they were raised and what's expected of them. And having lived that experience, I feel like, you know, it's really, I can really empathize with what they're going through. And these things are still there, you know, even 2022, and there are still, you know, first generation immigrants that are going through a lot of the things that I went through, you know, 20 years ago or whatever.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it's great to hear that you didn't feel the gender imbalance as much. And I think that's something I've seen from a lot of families here in the United States, that there isn't so much of an imbalance. Although there was a little bit in my family. My parents kind of had these vestigial structures of ideas as to what should be the case for women and men, but you know, they had similar expectations for my sister as they did for me. So this repeated idea of the gender differences also seems to be playing out in the panelists that we have. It's no secret that, you know, most of the panelists are women as opposed to men. I think a big part of this also comes down to the fact that, you know, men tend not to express their emotions as frequently. And I will say I've often felt like an anomaly because I've considered myself a very emotional man. And yeah, and you know, I have a lot of Indian guy friends, and it's a frequent problem I see. They often don't know how to express their emotions. They intellectualize it, and definitely something that needs to be worked on. I don't know how else to put it. It causes problems. It screws people up. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. We'll go to our final parent panelist. Sai, would you like to talk about what it was like growing up?
Sure. I think I'm the male parent. You know, I think perhaps it may make slight difference compared to what we heard so far. You know, what I do is, you know, I just bring out the contrast between how I was brought up and how my child has been brought up. You know, some of the points. So I was brought up in a small town, you know, where we had very little facilities other than libraries and some of the educational systems, you know, which are in place, and brought up in a middle class family where you know, it's not that we have anything that we wanted, but we have enough to you know, lead our life in a very comfortable manner. So it is not that, you know, oh, I need a Nintendo. No, we don't get it. You know, those kinds of things. It's not. So, and then my father was a professor, and my mom was, I would say, educated, but she didn't have any degree. She was just a ninth grade. She studied, and she got married. And so, from my background, I was born to her when she was 16. So it was like a child marriage for her. And then, you know, but it has reduced the generational gap between my mom and myself. And with the result, there was no topic that I cannot talk with her, you know, whether it is any kind of a topic, no matter what it is, no matter which book I read. She was a voracious reader, and she used to read almost all the books in the library next to us. It was a municipal library, and that library books, you know, the librarian used to bring her and then, you know, make her read and then get some comments. So that was the kind of background. And she used to teach us basically from the books. Whatever she reads, she used to make us read and then make us understand. Even Dale Carnegie books, you know, they win friends and influence people. She brought the book from the library, made us read the book. So when I was in middle school, so you can imagine how much of and there was a lot of emphasis on the education part. The traditional part, which I heard from other people, and they were very traditional, they were very religious, my parents, but they never insisted on our being religious or traditional. So I turned to be more liberal personality, and it was okay with them. So there was a kind of a tolerance, but, you know, they did what they wanted to do. The third point I wanted to make is, you know, we learned on a very non-structured environment. You know, when compared to the generation what we are bringing up here, we studied in a very non-structural environment. In the sense, if you want to read, you read. If you want to study, you study. But there is nothing like our day, whether we played or whether we studied or whether there was no structure there. So it was like a free and kind of mental development compared to how I brought up my child here, which I'll come to that, in my next session. The another thing that was is socially, we were brought up, we were rented in a place where there were so many children of various age groups, from younger to me to almost 10, 15 years older to me. So we used to call them Akas, Annas, that is basically the sisters and brothers. So if I have problem, I can go to anybody. And similarly, if somebody who is younger to me have a problem, they can come to me. So we were 4 children, and I was the eldest of all. And just wanted to give an example of how liberal we were. When I was 18, they took me to a movie called Immigrant, which was supposed to be a science movie, but on sex education. So they took me and made me see that movie sitting next to me on either side, and which I don't think even the current parents would do. This kind of even in United States, the environment. Of course, in the present days, you don't have to get anybody educated at 18 years, but people are getting educated even much younger. So that's basically, I would like to stop at that in view of time. And so liberal but traditional environment, I seen both. And so I had plenty of opportunity to learn, and I acquired my learning abilities from my mom and dad, who gave me that kind of an environment. And I came here when I was 35, after working in several places, including Bombay. So I brought here the mindset that a liberal Indian tradition, Indian environment, though it is liberal, but still I carry some of those highly competitive spirit and other things, brought here to this. So I'll stop at that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you touched on the liberal versus conservative, I guess, split as well. That's something I never thought about with respect to my parents as much. There were things that they were liberal with me on, but I think they definitely leaned more towards the conservative side, and I'm sure that actually made it more difficult for me to integrate within America as well. So last but not least, Dr. Vijay, you want to give a bit about what your childhood was like?
Sure. Namaskaram, good morning to you all. I came from Andhra Pradesh, Visakhapatnam, grew up there. Although I was born in Chennai, I grew up completely in Visakhapatnam. I come from a very large household. We were 25 members within the house on a regular basis, plus cousins and all. At any given time, about 30-35 people in the house. My parents were, I would call, perfect mix of tradition and progressiveness. My father insisted on education. We were 7 of us. All of us got higher education. And but at the same time, we came from a very traditional family. All the religious functions, all the, when I read what, from a Vedic perspective, what a householder should be like. And in my opinion, my father was that. He was a perfect householder, taking care of a lot of things. Now, my life is 2 parts. One is India and one is here. So I was well equipped when I came here, got my PhD already, and came here and did my internships and got myself a clinical psychologist license. What I was noticing was there was a lot of trauma between the immigrant and first generation communication and households. So that kind of helped me actually seeing that. I wanted to make sure, even though I was thinking maybe I should push my son to be a doctor or an engineer in the beginning, quickly I realized, oh my God, this is not how it should be. And I said to my son, you can do what you want. He went and did international affairs and then moved into the music industry, and he's just doing whatever. So, but I did learn very much from the community here when I started working with them, both what to do and what not to do. Perhaps, I'm sorry to say, more what not to do. Hopefully, I will be able to help others in the same journey as, you know, I want to have an effective model of communication. And I think Indian value system is fantastic. And the American value system is also excellent. I think we all have to put together our minds to figure out how best to bring these two. Thank you very much for having me in this panel.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up that last point of recognizing the good within the Indian value system, but also that there is good in the American system as well. I know growing up, it was very frequent that my parents would say, oh yeah, you don't want to be like these Americans, you know. I would ask for something like, it would just be as simple as listening to some music, like rap music. And it's like, oh, you're going to become corrupted like those Americans. And I think it's such a false dichotomy. We don't need that. Like, cultures are meant to evolve over time and learn from others. Like, we as individuals need to learn from others. Cultures also need to learn from others. So it's such an important point that you brought up. Yeah, I guess it leads perfectly into, yeah, it leads perfectly into the next question. So the crux of this panel, what was it like raising your kids here in the United States, and what would you do differently? And it feeds right into what we just talked about, because this is our chance to learn as a culture and really reflect, because that's the only way the culture can improve, and we can have a better bridge between the parents and children within these Indian families and South Asian families. So Geeta, would you like to talk about what it was like raising your kids and what you might have done differently, please?
When I came to this webinar and the subject that I came upon, I kind of thought, rather than talking about my own experience with my children, which of course I will include, but I decided to talk to many of the parents who came at my time in the 60s and 70s, because we all would, and I kind of talked to different kind of parents in all parts of America, and they came from all parts of India. Many came from very typical traditional family with arranged marriage. Many came from very religious, different languages. And so these couples who came here, most of us came here in our 20s. And so we were clearly not very experienced, except for what we saw back when we were growing up. And we had no support system at all. And that was one of the big things, I think. What we did not correctly is because we really didn't have, other than what we would go back to our values and heritage that we saw in India. And I think that was a big part of the parents I talked to were like from all kinds of backgrounds. So the couples were either Muslim, Hindu, between the two spouses, Hindu, Jain, Muslim, Catholic, Parsi, Hindu, but all of them. So it was really also very interesting, as Kali was talking about, the spiritualism, the religious part, how they would bring up. And that was at times caused conflict, at times they just let it go. And so it was very interesting. But there were three things that came to my mind in our generation. I'm sure it applies to all, but that they came with the common goal of really seeking better opportunity that America offered. We all knew that. And that was the big thing. And get a better lifestyle in a material sense, because that was easily available in America. The other one was very strongly seek your specialty or research or any of those things that you came as your dream to America. And because here you can follow and pursue that much more easily. So that was the second. And the third one was that many of our generation people wanted to help their families back in India, because most of us came from not very wealthy background, and therefore sponsor your siblings or send money back home. And that was also another very big part of our goal. So those are the kind of things we came. And I think I can generalize, including with my own children, what the kind of issues came, and I can divide it up very quickly into 3 or 4 things. One was the education and expectation, and I think that was a big one. What most of us wanted, everyone wanted their children to be educated, and I heard many parents say at least college level education, and then kind of do whatever. Others no, follow a certain profession and then go in that direction, and that created conflicts. And I know many who had that, many of the second generation people, young adults, went through that because they felt they were not validated or they were not acknowledged for the amount of work they put in. I had given that little anecdote about how the 2 young people went to first semester in college, and they immediately bonded. One of them was their food habit, and the second one was their educational. So the one said, I just had a test and I had 97. And the other responded, said, did your father say, where is the other 3? And that's exactly how they used to think. Where is your, what have you missed out? And I think the pressure, not by every parent, but many, was quite, either if it was subtle or overt, but it was there as far as getting. And the second one, I think, was big. And am I going out of time?
A little bit, but
Oh,
I think you brought up some really fantastic points. I mean, the pressure that, like, 97, where are the other 3? I had that same exact conversation with my parents when I was growing up, and I still do that to myself. I do it to myself too. It's like, one thing I've been struggling with is, I don't feel like I learned everything from my undergrad as well as I should have, and I'm going through and I'm trying to relearn all of it. And part of it is because I love math and physics, but part of it is that shame of, like, you got a 97, where's that 3? It's in my mind, it's like, oh, there's this thing that I missed. It's really hard. So it sounds like the parents wish they didn't do that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Now looking back, we see that. But I'll make one quick point. There are 2 or 3 others, but I'll let others talk. But the social life, friends, fashion, and all of that was also a very big issue. And like you said, Shivam, the music you heard or the way you dressed up, proms, many parents were very concerned when the girls went to prom, or dating, or even for boys, alcohol, cigarettes, those type of things were drugs. We were very insecure generation, I think, overall, I see, because we really worked so hard. We came with very lofty ideas and vision, but then we had no support system and we didn't know where to draw from. And therefore, I think we gave much less time than we should have to our children. We were running around, taking them to extracurricular activities, working shifts for our jobs, and then raising a family and everything. So we actually did not always see their unhappiness or anxiety that they were going through. And that was a big thing I saw. And children really, and now these kids are married, majority of them, and they've married in different culture, ethnicity, religion, race, and some of them, of course, married in the Indian community. And those also created a lot of tiff, because we all really wanted to give the best of both worlds, but we didn't quite know how to balance it.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting you bring up that part about controlling like music, for example, or dressing and whatnot. I think kids end up acting out. They end up acting out of resentment. I spent so many years, I play guitar, and I actually played heavy metal. I played death metal. I played thrash metal. And part of it, I was a very angry person, and that was one part of it. But part of it was also like kind of to say screw you to my parents. And it just doesn't work. You can't control people. Gali, do you wanna speak to?
I've had very similar experiences in terms of, especially around emotional parenting. And I spent, honestly, I went to grad school to try to understand what was going on with me, right? And what's really helped contextualize a lot of my own experience and a lot of experiences that I've heard across the panel is, we had the social and cultural context of our home country, right? India was colonized for 800 years. We as psychologists, we know that trauma literally passes down like DNA, right? We do to others as has been done to us. And when you have suffered the kind of, like some of the statistics, right? The wealth, the looting that happened of India is currently valued at around something like $46 trillion. $46 trillion. India was 23% of the world GDP, and when the British left, it was at 0.03%. Not just that, there's all these statistics of when the British came to India, they studied sterile technique in Nasik, because apparently when you're talking about gender, right? If a man slept with a married woman, his nose would get cut off, which is where the phrase of naak kat gayi. If anybody knows Hindi, like it's like, that literally means nose is cut off. His nose would get cut off, not a woman's, right? And then in Nasik, what they were doing was they were reconstructing the noses of those people. So they were the surgeons in Nasik in the 1600s, when the British first came, were practicing sterile technique, and the British actually learned that and published that in their journals at the time. So and then there's this book called A Beautiful Tree by Dharamapal, who lived in Oxford in the early 1900s. He published data that the British had published, where there was an indigenous school system when the British first got to India that had an equal representation of all castes and men and women. So there's all this data that suggests that, and by the way, for any of the discrimination, whether it's gender related or caste related that exists these days, there's no textual basis for it. Our texts do not create any distinction between anybody based on their gender or caste or any other parts of their identities, right? So like for me, like one of the big pieces of healing myself was understanding that a lot of what happened to my generation and the generations before was actually this intergenerational trauma, and that what we need to do is actually shift back to what our tradition is indigenously supposed to be, right? And that a lot of there's a split between the textual basis of our culture and what our culture actually is. And for me, that distance is colonization and trauma.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
it sounds
sort of like my piece.
Yeah, you're talking about that cultural gap once again, and maybe parents want to make sure that they like hold on to their own culture, and that causes some level of insecurity, like Geeta was talking about.
I think my daughter, when she was in upper elementary school, had one time told me, because I asked her who the friend was, black or white, just with, not that I'm racist or racially biased, but I wanted to know who they are hanging out with. And she kind of said, "Are you racist, mother? You know who I am?" He said, "I'm an American with Indian heritage." From that day on, I knew I had to know that. They are Americans with Indian heritage. We kept calling ourselves Indians all the time, but we really came here to assimilate in this society. And I think we need to move forward that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Savita, would you like to share what it was like raising your kids, and if you could do anything differently?
Sure. Yeah, I made a lot of mistakes, I think, like a lot of young adults who came here. I just wanted to say that I came here in the early 90s. So my kids are now like in the late teens, early 20s. So I'm not sure. I probably will fit in somewhere in the middle of this panel generation. I had an arranged marriage. I did not know him. He was studying here. So when I came in, new husband, new culture, new everything, right? And I started school. So the school was new too. So I did not have a support system over here. I did not know many people. I didn't have family. So when we started our family, and my oldest was born, I was trying to get whatever I had, with what I was told by my parents, how you raise, and also like how my childhood was. Parent knows best. I think that was kind of like the logic that was that based my parenting skills. The few friends that I had cultivated over here, Indians, obviously, all of us had similar interests in how we wanted to raise the kids, put them in multiple activities, and then they can pick whatever they're passionate about later on. Indian culture is very important, so Shishu Bharati, the Sunday school, either violin or Carnatic music, Bharatnatyam if you're a girl, that sort of thing. So these were all the traditional things that we were holding on to, and I also felt like some sort of a responsibility and burden to make sure that my kids were exposed to the Indian culture, to all these Indian habits, because I was like, if I don't do it, oh my God, then I will be responsible to be the break between, where my generation had it and this generation is completely losing it because we are not in the country. So, whether dressing them up in their kurtas and, pajamas and taking them to the temple, going to the Kannada Kuta, the Telugu Association or whatever, having them participate in that. These were all things that we did when the kids were younger. It was fine. But I think one of the biggest issues that I had, that we ended up facing, was when they went to a teacher, music teacher who was very well known in the community, but she had the traditional Indian approach where she would, humiliate the kids in front of others. She would yell at them. That's not the kind of, teaching skills or a concept that is over here. And I continue to support that, not realizing or not recognizing the trauma and the pain that my kids were going through. And they were so happy once they got out of high school. One went to private high school and it was like, oh, now I can't go to her, so I'm done. So I think some of those things, and then not being able to actively listen to them and their feedback, because you always think, oh yeah, as an adult, I should know better. I should know what's good for my kids, rather than also give them an opportunity to voice their opinions. But they were very much, integrated into the American culture. They did all the Boy Scouts and baseball, soccer, all the sports activities. They did sleepovers. They did trips with the kids wherever they were supposed to go to. But if I had to change it, I probably would have done a lot more listening. I would not have held on to like, oh my God, Indian culture, if they don't wear the kurta, like the whole world is going to fall apart. Oh my God, I'm a failure as a parent, as an Indian parent, those sort of things. That I would definitely have taken a closer look. And I think another important aspect that we faced in my family was healthy relationships. So that is something that we suffered because I had an arranged marriage and the compatibility was not there. But we kept for the sake of the kids, we have to be there. For the sake of the kids, for the sake of the kids. But it actually, ended up having a completely adverse effect and a very traumatic experience for the kids. And the whole reason I wanted to come onto this particular panel was to insist on the fact that, Indian parents, when you think about your own relationships, think about how it's going to affect your children, and the longer term effects it's going to have on not just on an impact on the kids themselves as they become young adults, but also on the relationships that they have to develop as they move forward. And I think it's extremely critical for us as Indian families to understand that we should be able to break that barrier of, oh my God, what will the social, aspect of what will the community think, what will your parents or your family back home in India think if something happens with this relationship. So yeah, healthy relationships, I probably would have introduced that earlier.
Everything you just said resonated with me really significantly. So I have a diagnosis of complex PTSD and I do therapy for that. But I'm in a relationship right now, and there are times where like I feel my whole body tense up, and I get flashback to the memory of like sitting on the dining table watching my parents fight with each other, spending so much time playing surrogate family therapist when I'm like 12.
Yep.
And yeah, just times when I grew up and I didn't feel that integrated into Indian culture. I didn't like the dances and whatnot. I was I like to spend time like playing video games or reading books, and it was always treated as like a source of shame almost, like what's wrong with you? Like you're not an Indian kid or something. And I never got that breathing room. And it's only once I actually left for college that I was able to discover things about Indian culture that I liked. I actually really like the spiritual side of it. And I've read like Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, some yogic philosophy. That's the part of it I identify with. But I never got the breathing room to do that. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Briya, do you want to talk? Do you want to talk through Savita's experiences?
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing and being so open and honest about everything. What you said resonated very deeply with me as well, both in my own upbringing, but also what I see in my practice. And I think you really nailed it. Communication is so important. And I think that it's so difficult, maybe because your generation did not really have that experience with your parents, with communicating your needs and wants and desires and how you want to live your life, your passions, all of these things. So there wasn't really a lot of space to do that with your own children. And I'm noticing that a lot with my own parents and also in my practice, like I said, where there isn't really this kind of space to really understand who this person is, what they want. And I think there's a bit of a feeling of, I guess it's like authoritarian or authoritative parenting, like they know what's best because they turned out fine. Their parents did what they thought was best, they turned out fine. And so they're kind of doing the same thing for their own children. And maybe not so much focus on kind of a relationship that's maybe a little bit more kind of collaborative and what do you like, maybe we can come to an agreement together on something that works for both of us. And I understand that as the child is young and still sort of learning, you want to kind of make sure they're on the right path. And so I understand where that's coming from, and I think it's coming from a place of fear. But I think especially as the children get older, in their teenage years, young adults, I think that it's really important to give them that freedom and that space to really grow as individuals. And I don't know if that's really happening for a lot of people. I know that for me, it took me a long time, probably well after my adolescent and young adult years, to really feel like I've really grown into the person that I want to be, or that I hope to be. The other thing that I think is also very important is modeling good relationships. And I think that you really nailed it, Shivam, you nailed it with your parents. And I think people maybe really don't understand how much that affects the children, just sort of being able to model good relationships, good communication styles, that kind of thing. Another thing that I wanted to say, which I think it's changed a lot over time, is that parents have their limitations, and I think that that's not anything to be ashamed of. That's not that's just the way it is. It's like what sort of your upbringing, the skill set that you have, the tools that you have, and sometimes maybe what your child is going through, it kind of exceeds what you're capable of doing. And I think being open to allowing that child to seek guidance from a therapist or some sort of other person that might be able to help them through a difficult situation can be really freeing for them, because I think a lot of them feel a sense of shame, or they're also feeling a lot of guilt and shame. The parents are feeling a lot of guilt and shame for not being able to address this issue adequately, and I think it causes a lot of communication barriers also because of that.
I just wanted to add one small fact. The words the kids are resilient is so overused, and actually to the point of being abused. They're not that resilient. I think we hide under that, where we expose them to a lot of trauma and we think, oh, kids are resilient, they'll be fine. No, they won't be fine, and we as parents and adults who surround them need to understand that there are limitations to what they're resilient about. They're not like, built of stone where no matter what you keep throwing at them or throwing around them, that it's not going to hit them. So it would be good for parents to recognize, to not take that literally, but actually, break free from that resiliency and actually let the kids be vulnerable and open to, accepting the relationship building between the parent and the child.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add one other thing, and it's for parents not to take things personally. If the child doesn't want to do something that the parent maybe thinks that would be good for the child, not to take it personally, because I think that there is a lot of enmeshment that happens in Indian families, South Asian families, immigrant families, in America, we really try to kind of individuate and have people sort of become their own person and have their own ideals in life. And I think that there might be a feeling of taking things very personally or being offended when that doesn't happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Saya and Dr. Vijay, I want to make sure you two get a chance to speak. So Saya, do you want to speak to what your experience was like parenting? And Dr. Vijay, I'll have you reflect on what he says. So Saya, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to, earlier I told you how I was brought up, and then when it came to my son, we came around around the age of 35, and then left everything in India and then came out here. So started out with zero, and there is a lot of economic pressure in the sense, how we do what we do, and counting every dollar, and the mindset is in India where a dollar was equivalent to 60 or 70 rupees at the time, 65 or so, and so you always count and say that, okay, this is what it's going to cost us and things of that kind. So that's one aspect of it. Whereas, my mindset of India has not changed, after I come here, and it was on my child, definitely. The second point was, he was brought up in a very traditional, in a very structured environment. He used to go in the morning, the school, and then when he comes in the evening, he has to play between this hour and that hour. Then he has to go for violin, or he has to go and do something else in this hour. So, it was a highly structured environment where perhaps, there was no time for him to breathe. He just had to do what he's supposed to do. And whereas that was not the case when I was brought up, we used to play and, have a relaxed environment, whereas he didn't have. That's what I could see very easily. And then, I'm a kind of a liberal mind, whereas my wife is traditional. So we had kind of a conflict. And, the child, when it comes to my son, I have only one son, and he had a conflict, which one to choose. And second thing is, sometimes he took advantage of it. So I say something and she says something, and then he could sometimes he make the choice, depending on the convenience of what he wants. So these are all the points. And then, I was brought up in a very social environment, whereas when it comes to him, he was the only child, and we were the only parents. 90% of the time he will see us, and then our own minds are the limitation. Not that we didn't have any other people, but, whatever I knew, whatever my wife knew, and that was the limitation. And that's how the whole of his young education, or the time period when he was growing up. But in all this, I would say what worked was our open communication, which I learned from my mom, and that has helped him, in expressing anything he wanted. In the sense, sometimes, or many times, we in the middle school onwards, we used to have weekly parent-child meeting. In the sense, it was like a meeting during lunchtime or a little later. We sit together, and then he proposes something, and then we discuss the pros and cons. And at the end of the day, it may be my way. That's a different thing. But I used to put my reason. He used to put his reasons why he is right and why I was wrong. And if I say I'm wrong, and if I deviate, we used to have a board on the refrigerator where, three of us, basically he can give negative points for me, negative points for my mom, for his mom or my wife. And so, after some time, he used to point out, say, you deviated from what you said, and I'm right in this particular aspect. You do something and then tell me something else. Those are all the things he was able to express freely. But in spite of that, our own insecurity, our own the mental block, has not allowed us to understand him fully. In the sense, when we brought him up here, we brought him here, and then exposed him to a different cultural setup. We never really understood what that culture is. The culture of what prevails in United States. We live in Houston, so Houston environment, is totally different from what we perceived. And that was the kind of a thing which, if I have to look back, maybe I will put in more energy in learning about that particular culture. So that is one thing which I'll definitely make sure that we do it differently.
Sounds like, I just have to make sure in interest of time, but it sounds like echoed a lot of the things that the previous panelists have shared about with regards to making sure that you hear your kids. And I think that open communication is fantastic. That's one of the issues that I had, is I had to stuff a lot of my emotions, and unfortunately they come out now, and sometimes it's not in the most pleasant manner. So it's important to be able to make sure your kids can share anything early on. Dr. Vijay, is there anything that you want to reflect on that Sai touched on? We can't hear you.
Sorry, I can hear some feedback. The open communication that Sai was talking about, I often recommend that parents have weekly meetings. And I actually provide a structure on how the weekly meeting should be. I was very anxious raising my son. I knew the theory. I was also quite anxious raising my son. The biggest conflict was what other family members living in this country were expecting out of me and my children. How my friends were, the only topics they talk about, whose son is doing what, whose daughter is doing what, how, what kind of scholarships they got, what kind of extracurriculars they did, how great they are. And really listening to that is very difficult, and not wanting to do the same. So this whole part was there. And then there is my own understanding that this should not be the case. That really, to kind of say what Khalil Gibran says, our children come through us. They don't come from us. I had to write that down and put it on the refrigerator in order for me to remind myself, I am not going to go with the Joneses, so to speak. So I think observing our children's reactions has to become paramount. Observing, parent knows best, but I'm going on telling kids do this, do that, do that. And if I don't listen to the children's reaction to me, then I'm just going to blindly follow. I do understand parental struggles. You know, they come here and they want to first establish themselves in this country. They want to make sure they have enough money. They want to push their pros and values from the time they came onto their children. So we went to India once and my son asked me, Mom, should I be wearing Indian clothes? And I was thrilled. And I told him, yes, you should wear Indian clothes. And he wore Indian clothes and went with his cousins. And when he came back, Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody wore Indian clothes, all the cousins, everyone, and they were even laughing at me. So, you know, for me to really hear that and know that things have to be, you know, so providing time, space. One other thing is people talk about quality time. I really think there's no such thing. The amount of time you give your children is what is more important. Of course, it has to be quality, but quickly doing 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour here and there is not going to cut it. Earlier in life, they need a lot more time. We are running out of time.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could
Sorry,
really,
I'd like to move on to the questions. We don't have that much time. So the first question I see is, what are the challenges faced while raising boys? So that's an interesting question in that, you know, we were talking about the possible gender differences early on. So would anybody on the panel like to answer that question? Savita.
So raising boys, I felt that boys have a responsibility in how they treat the girls or the women in their lives, with respect, you know, like do the right things. But I also said don't date till you're much older, because you're not going to be, you're not emotionally capable of like handling the pitfalls. So I don't have girls. I was a girl, you know, obviously raised as a daughter. But for the boys, I constantly tell them how you treat the person is extremely important. Share your responsibilities as you grow older. Not a male-dominated society. You can't just sit over there when somebody is cooking or when somebody is doing this or that. You know, be a partner in everything that you do with the person that you're with.
I think that's fantastic advice. It's definitely like there are stereotypes that we have regarding gender, and it's good to question those and maybe try the other side. The next question I have is, how do you cope with not being able to fit in? And I'm gonna assume that that's with respect to fitting into American society. I definitely could speak to that myself, but I'll let the panelists speak about what's a good way to cope with that challenge.
Our generation really had that struggle, and I second side by saying that we wanted the best of America's opportunities, and we made their life very structured. We wanted them to learn this, learn that, but at the same time, we were very fearful of us not giving them a good Indian value system, and we were trying to mix the two things, and I think it became way too much. I saw that coming from first decade of our children's lives. First and second decades were crucial for variety of reasons. I remember one very quick thing that I took in Diwali. I told both my kids to wear Indian outfit. I'd asked the teacher, she was very thrilled, and I thought I would talk about Diwali. I took some pakoras and some Indian sweets as finger foods, and the kids, the other children, because what I took, I sort of said, this is very typical Indian sweet made out of cashew and pistachio. It's called barfi. And my kids were teased to death about barfing. And, oh, don't eat that, it's a bar. And I thought, oh dear, I caused so much more damage trying to introduce Indian culture there, you know. And so we were really trying to do on every side to put the best in our children. But as Dr. Vijay says, it really was something that we had to let them kind of decide, or, you know.
I don't know whether the question was whether it was the discomfort on the part of the parents to fit in or the kids.
Children. I thought it was children.
And if it is parents, I want them to deal with I want them to be uncomfortable and still reach out. There's nothing wrong with discomfort. Anything new is uncomfortable. And I think parents should really make effort to include other religions, races, whatever it is, and make sure they go out of their way, even if they're uncomfortable. Now, for the kids to feel more comfortable, parental modeling of involvement with others will help them.
Yeah, these are great answers. Yeah, it's important for parents to, I guess, be a bit uncomfortable with that, and it's going to be uncomfortable. You know, you're in a new culture. I guess it ties into the next question of any experience or insight about moving back to India while kids are growing up. This individual feels unable to make peace with raising kids as Americans with Indian heritage and wants them to be Indians with American influence. Yeah, Savita?
Quickly, I have a friend who was born here. They raised her and her sister here till they were about 7 or 8 years old. And because they were girls, they just wanted to bring them back. They finished their, one did medicine, the other did engineering. When they finished that, they both got married and came here. The friend, she was my engineering classmate, she said, I could not stand it over there. I hated it as long as I was in India. I couldn't wait to come back. So she's very happy back here. But coincidentally, her sister, who was also over here, went back to India because she wanted to take care of the parents or whatever. They had some medical issues. So she went back there. She's very happy over there. So it works both ways. But what I would recommend is, and I've seen this with another friend who wanted to go back, it didn't work out, it came back. So there was a lot of turmoil for the kids too. Don't be, you know, in like a seesaw situation. Make a decision one way and go and figure out how to get the kids either settled in India or settled over here. That's my answer.
Yeah, Kali, would you like to speak to that?
I think, you know, I think it's really important to keep in mind authoritative parenting, right? So high support and high expectations. That's the best type of parenting there is. And, you know, I had friends who were born here in America, then moved to Mumbai, and I grew up with them. And then they both came back to the US for college. And then now they have like jobs here, they're married here, they're settled here. So it's like, the thing is that what I saw as being a big part of what was done for them is their parents were really present for them, right? When there was a struggle, there was this strong bond between the parents and the kid, and the parents took the time to establish that because they spent time, they listened to the kids, they built that trust. So when there was a problem, I saw my friends going to their parents. And working it out, right? Having that support is absolutely invaluable. So, you know, like we've talked a lot about the authoritarian, which is high expectations but low support. There is no emotional communication. There is no there's no trust, and kids will feel scared of their parents, right? You don't want to be in that space where there is that fear to the point. There has to be respect, but there can also be love, right? You don't want to move point of that there's so much fear that kids can no longer feel comfortable talking to their parents. So maintaining that falls squarely on parents' shoulders, because you get to decide the tone of the communication that happens. You get to decide how openly you talk about things. And if you are not talking about it, by the way, your kids are getting these messages from the culture, right? So the cultural messages about drugs, about sex, about alcohol, about religion, about whatever, like dating, all this stuff is going to happen for these kids, whether or not you talk about it. So the one thing that parents can really do is, like, you know, we talk, what Dr. Geeta talked about, just be uncomfortable. That Dr. Vijay talked about, be uncomfortable. I understand that some of these topics are taboo, but these kids are already hearing about it. So do you want a say in that conversation or not? Right? That's really the choice that we have as parents. And, you know, and then do you want them to be able to come to you when they have these questions? And do you want to be able to help them navigate some of these struggles that are going to come up for them? Because they're part of the society. So it's like they are going to have to deal with these questions and these choices. It's just a matter of fact of whether they're able to come to you and whether they trust you enough to help them make that decision and how they navigate it. that's really the only choice that we have here. So that's the big piece.
I think these are, yeah, fantastic points. We're going to have to wrap up soon, unfortunately, because it is 1:30. So, Dr. Vici, do you want to make the last comment?
I just wanted to say, this is something that I see often about parents with wanting to go back to India. If the intention is to go back to India, I think it's best to go back early, while the kids are still in the elementary school level. That's one thing. The second thing is it's important to make frequent trips to India. And when you make frequent trips to India, it should not just be relatives and temples. It's got to be more than relatives and temples, so that they kind of understand. What I notice is that either kids love to go to India or they hate to go to India. In fact, I have a couple of kids who tell me going to India is traumatic. So, because all we do is this, So what I'm saying is that it's important to leave early, and it's important to make frequent trips so that kids understand, and make sure that when you do go, make it a good experience so that you can go back.
Yeah, that's, yeah, really, really good advice. I mean, I know going to India for me was very huge in terms of who I am as a person. So, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Also, behind that question, I think there's some want to maybe escape some of the Western influence sometimes for parents that want to move back. I want to tell you that Western influence is in India too, right? If you're living in cities, if you're wherever you are, you're not going to be able to kind of go around some of these uncomfortable topics, some of like the issues of modernity, right? And we've named a bunch of them. It's like it's better to deal with the discomfort and deal with, like, actually have a conversation with your kids when you have the opportunity to build that relationship and to actually have it. Because whether or not you're in India or here, there's really no way around some of the problems that face societies at large.
Yeah. All right. It is 1:34, so we're a few minutes over time, but thank you all so much for attending this webinar. And thank you, panelists, for sharing your opinions, perspectives, and experiences. This is really the best way to improve the generation gap between the immigrants and the children who are in America. It's a really challenging question too. So obviously one webinar won't do it, but the idea is to get the ball rolling, and hopefully there will be slow incremental change. So thank you so much.
Going home message, Shivam, is that your generation will help the new immigrants who are coming, because you guys have grown up here and faced everything. They are your age, those who come, and they will benefit from what you people have gone through. So they will be able to help their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Desi, would you like to take?
Yeah, thank you everybody. And then it's I don't think 1 hour is doing any justice to the topic, because we are just scratching the surface, and we have got a long way to go. I would like I thank all the audience, and then I would like them to participate in future events, and then try to shape up our conversation, try to include what they really desire to do, so we make it more meaningful to large people. One of the questions I see is, can you share your email with the audience, or any of you have any objection? Let
I
me
have
know.
no problem. You can do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I will send this email details with my follow-up email tomorrow with the GoToWebinar. So you can contact them whenever you want and talk to them about your whatever you want to talk about. But thank you again. And we, like I said, we are just starting this process and then going, in the topic. We want to keep it alive, keep it going. So at least once in a couple months, we want to offer a session in this subject and then go, deeper and deeper into that. I would really love the parents or the first generation Americans come and share their specific issues and how they solved it, what is the success story, what is the failure, all those things, so we can educate others before they get into that problem. Like Shivam keeps bringing us to it, saying that, hey, I had this problem, so you don't do it again to your own kids or to your own siblings, or all those things. So I thank everybody for their time and efforts. We are running over time anyway, but thanks for the patience for all the this thing, and then we will be in touch with this topic as we go along, and then we will offer you sometime, coming in the springtime. I especially want to thank the parents, Geeta especially, who volunteered herself to come and talk to us, and then Savita and Sai, and who are the pioneers in bringing this topic alive. And then Dr. Vijay is our resident consultant, so we always rely on her every time we come into this topic. And I want to thank Briya and Kali also for their valuable input. We look forward to collaborating with you in future too. And Shivam, excellent job. And of course, in the background, Dr. Prasad Kaipa is also been there quietly and giving it. So he is also an instrumental in bringing this topic, to the forefront. So we will continue to work on this, and then we will see you again next time on a similar topic. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the Super Bowl.